When fans think of Brian France, it's not usually in a good light. And the legacy that Brian France currently has had in the last 5 years since his unceremonious exit from NASCAR has not been a pretty one. But a lot has changed in that time. And one thing that has changed is that for the first time in years, Brian France has made a public appearance on the Dale Jr. Download. Now, this won't be necessarily everything having to do with his interview. I don't want to spoil everything. I implore you to listen to it yourself. It's over 2 great hours of a conversation. But what I want to talk about today is what Brian France's legacy is today. Has it changed at all with being on the Dale Jr. Download and with the direction NASCAR has gone since his departure? Because I think it's a genuinely good question. Brian France is on a very short list of the most hated people in NASCAR, accompanied by some, for instance, like Teresa Earnhardt. And with him coming on the Dale Jr. Download, I think that it was an opportunity to kind of clear the air in a little bit of ways. Dale Jr. has been very good at doing this for different drivers and people in the sport and just people in general, of getting the best out of them, humanizing people that generally are not very well liked by the NASCAR fandom. So let's get right into it. First off, I just want to say props to Brian France, because in 2 ways he's done things that I think a lot of people didn't think he would do. I think, for one, it should be commended that he came on to the Dale Jr. Download when he didn't have to. He came on and talked about relatively tough subjects, even if it wasn't pushed too much by the interviewers. And then also for cleaning himself up. Seems like he looks a lot better in health than he was last time fans saw him. And I don't care who you are, that's something I think we all should wish for. I'm glad he cleaned himself up. Seems to have straightened out his life a bit. So good on Brian France for that. Now, I will say one thing I really liked about this interview and changed my perspective on him with was his backstory. I think everybody knew that he grew up with NASCAR around him. I think everybody knew in some way that he grew up working in the sport. But I do think for many fans, they misconstrued that by thinking that France was basically handed a silver spoon and given everything in life. But that wasn't exactly what happened in any way. France worked from the bottom up, sweeping the floors at Talladega in the grandstands, going all the way up through regional divisions, and watching his grandfather and father firsthand build up NASCAR to what it was. And he especially went into detail about it with the 1979 Daytona 500. And something that I think a lot of people need to know about Brian France that was said there is that he was the man who really negotiated the contract for TV between 2001 and 2006, the one with Fox and NBC. This was the contract that produced the greatest viewership in NASCAR history, to the point where about 10 million people per week were watching NASCAR, and the NFL, even in the fall, had to look back and see NASCAR closing in on them. So, as many blunders as we as fans will say that Brian France has had, there are very good things that he's done, and he did, in a lot of ways, help grow the sport and be very instrumental in that. And I think that in this way, if this gets out to more fans, I do think that fans will change their view, at least before a bit of the, quote, fall of NASCAR happened. In my opinion, what France learned from all this is where he really went off track, in my opinion. I think he saw the ambition and the work and the drive that his father and grandfather had, and I do think that he had ambition and hard work and drive to move NASCAR forward. But he saw 3 big things, in my opinion. Risk was always needed and done in the past, and from what he could tell, and what a lot of people can tell when you look at the numbers, it worked. NASCAR kept growing every time they risked trying something new. But he also learned from that you can't really look back. You can't rely on tradition to grow. And when it comes to racing fans in general, that's just not the right way to go about it. Fans do appreciate their history a lot, and moving on from a majority of that history in a quick amount of time was one of his biggest blunders and one of the biggest mistakes that anyone running a business could make. And then that everything had to cater towards expansion. While generally that's true, I think that he thought plugging things in would mean it would turn on the magic light bulb of getting it out to more people, where that's just not how it works. The biggest of these is the chase and playoff formats. The thing that really bugs me about Brian France, and it still bugs me about NASCAR today, and this is where his legacy seeps into modern day NASCAR and how they run things, is the fact that he continuously compared racing to the NFL, the NBA, and the MLB, and in a lot of ways, NCAA football. And the thing is that racing is not a stick and ball sport. It is fundamentally different by how you do it. There is not some tool that you hold on to. The person in the car is literally having the tool around them. It's completely different on a fundamental level. And I think that this is one of those ways that on a business sense, yes, some things could get changed, but when running how you do a championship, how races are run, it's just not the greatest way to do it. And I get the goal. The goal was to make a bigger championship fight, to make it where more drivers at the end of the year were running for a title, and to make it where more eyes would be on the end of the season. I get that. And he's very pro playoff expansion too, arguing that with the NBA expanding to have tons and tons and tons of teams, NASCAR also should have tons of drivers in the playoffs. That way it's opened up to more drivers fighting for it. At least he admitted it wasn't perfect, as no real way to crown a championship is, but it did seem very flimsy, and I do wish there was a lot more pushback on that. Now, all of this was done to branch out, and that was the ultimate goal. And it's a goal that NASCAR has today. You see it with them going to Chicago and LA and all these different cities that are traditionally non-NASCAR affiliated. But you can also see in the past that France made some good moves when it came to branching NASCAR out in the peak of the 90s and 2000s. That big push to have movie brands on cars, like Star Wars, for instance, that was Brian France that had that major push. Now, there were also some problems he had with branching out. For instance, he said that the rollout method to get away from North Wilkesboro was a mistake, but he didn't say leaving Wilkesboro was a mistake. And he also said stage racing is a way to make it more palatable for casual fans. And in that regard, he basically did say he thought it was okay and was very defensive of this, of alienating the core audience. And the reaction overall is that he just was really defensive and compared it way too much to stick and ball sports. And while I get that you're going to defend what you did in the past, it seems like there isn't much hindsight given to the moves that he made and how it affected both people in the industry and people watching. And in that regard, it's not going to be very good for his legacy, in my opinion. So talking about that, overall, what is Brian France's legacy in NASCAR and just in general? Well, I do think, like I said before, having this much time, half a decade between him being basically thrown out of NASCAR for his actions, and now that things have numbed a bit. Some of the bigger changes he's made, yes, they weren't the greatest, but again, he's admitted to some mistakes like the COT, for instance. But I'm going to say this, Brian France is not an evil boogeyman. He didn't purposely try to kill NASCAR for no reason or out of malice or anything. I think, in my opinion, Brian France, if his story is let out more, and if he has a little bit more humility, should be known as somebody who had great ideas and motivations for NASCAR, and definitely when he was coming up, he did, but in leadership, I think he was clouded by hubris and ego. And I think that many of his changes did help NASCAR. I'm looking at a lot of the big pushes in the 90s and early 2000s, as well as a lot of the safety improvements. But ultimately, when it came to the racing product and what the fans saw every Sunday and sometimes Saturday nights, I think that still his legacy will be a pretty negative one amongst fans. His off-track mistakes were bad, I know, and I didn't really talk too much about that, but you know what? If he's cleaned his life up, if he's making it better for himself, I think that people should forgive him. He did a dumb mistake. A lot of people do horrible mistakes in their lives, but he should be given a second chance at life to make a life for himself more. While I wish that the interview itself had pried a little more and not had as many softball questions, I will also admit that I'm thinking they wouldn't have got the interview if they were asking fastball, hardball questions. So with that, I'm going to pass it all on to you. What do you think Brian France's legacy will be? Let me know down in the comments below. While you're at it, leave a like on this video, share this video, and subscribe to my channel for more great NASCAR content. To all my channel members, thank you for your continuous support. So until next time, have a good one.